Snow falls gently outside as a 62-year-old woman stands alone on a sidewalk, suitcase beside her, tears freezing on her cheeks as she watches a door slam shut. The Christmas wreath still hangs, mocking the holiday spirit that should have filled this day. After 34 years of raising my son, after working night shifts and double shifts to give him everything, after helping him buy that beautiful house he just threw me out of, he didn't know one crucial thing. I still legally owned it all, and I was about to teach him the hardest lesson a mother ever could. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought I'd spend Christmas night in a hotel room, alone, with nothing but a hastily packed suitcase and the clothes on my back. But there I was, Eleanor Mitchell, Ellie to my friends, staring at the ceiling as holiday music played faintly through the wall from the neighboring room. Just hours earlier, I'd been preparing Christmas dinner in my son's kitchen. The same kitchen I'd helped him design when he bought the house 5 years ago. The same kitchen where I'd taught him to make his first grilled cheese sandwich when he was barely tall enough to reach the counter. My hands still smelled of rosemary and sage from the turkey I'd been seasoning when everything fell apart. "Mom, we need to talk," James said, his voice unusually flat as he pulled me away from the stove. Vanessa stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her sleeve. Their daughter Sophie had been sent upstairs to play with her new Christmas gifts, already a bad sign. They guided me to the dining room table, the one I'd helped them pick out at an estate sale, and refinished myself over the course of 3 weekends. James cleared his throat while Vanessa stared at her phone, barely present. "We've been thinking," he began, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's time for you to find your own place." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I have my own place. I've been staying in the guest room since I retired, just like we planned." "That was supposed to be temporary, Mom. It's been 8 months. "James, we agreed I'd help with Sophie, while you and Vanessa worked. You said having me here would save you money on childcare and—" I trailed off as I saw their expressions. "The thing is," Vanessa finally looked up from her phone, "we're expecting again. We'll need the room for the nursery. But there's the office upstairs that you barely use." "Mom," James cut me off sharply, "this isn't a negotiation. We need our space back. We need to be a family." The words hit like a physical blow. We need to be a family. As if I wasn't part of it. As if I was an intruder. But where would I go? "I sold my condo to help with your down payment on this house." My voice sounded small even to my own ears. "You've been a nurse for 40 years, James said, his tone businesslike, reminding me of when he spoke to clients at his financial advisory firm. "You must have savings, a pension. It's not our fault if you didn't plan properly." I stared at my son, barely recognizing him. The boy who once cried when I worked double shifts, who begged me to come home early because he missed me too much. The boy who promised when he grew up, he'd buy me a big house where we could always be together. "I put most of my savings into helping you buy this house," I said quietly. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Here we go again with the guilt trip. James told me you'd do this." "Do what? State a fact?" My voice trembled with emotion. "I put $120,000 toward your down payment. That was most of what I had left after paying for your college, James." "Nobody asked you to do that," James snapped. "That was your choice." I felt like I'd been slapped. "You absolutely did ask me. You and Vanessa came to me saying you'd found your dream home but couldn't quite afford it. You literally said, 'Mom, we need your help or we'll lose it.'" "Well, we would have figured something out eventually," Vanessa muttered. "The point is," James continued, "we need you out by New Year's. We've already hired a designer to convert the room, and the contractor starts January 2nd. "A week? You're giving me a week to find somewhere to live?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It's Christmas, James. Where am I supposed to go?" There's a nice retirement community on the other side of town, Vanessa offered, as if she was being helpful. Patricia's aunt lives there. She says they sometimes have short-term rentals available. Patricia was Vanessa's mother, a woman who'd made it clear from day one that she found me lacking. Too blue-collar for her daughter's husband's mother. The thought of being relegated to a place on her recommendation felt like another twist of the knife. I can't afford a retirement community, I said, not after what I invested here. That's not really our problem, is it? Vanessa said, checking her watch. The turkey's probably burning, by the way. I stood up mechanically and returned to the kitchen. As I basted the turkey, my hands were shaking so badly I splashed hot drippings onto my wrist. The pain barely registered. My mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. Later, we sat around the table eating the Christmas dinner I'd prepared. Sophie chatted excitedly about her presence, oblivious to the tension. I could barely swallow past the lump in my throat. Vanessa's parents, Patricia and Donald, joined us, discussing their recent cruise as if nothing was wrong. "Grandma Ellie, aren't you hungry?" Sophie asked, noticing my full plate. "Just saving room for dessert, sweetheart," I managed to say. "Speaking of which," Patricia interjected, "Vanessa tells me you're moving out soon, Eleanor. That's probably for the best. Young families need their space, don't they?" I looked up to see her smug expression. She knew. They'd all known about this plan, had probably discussed it in detail, everyone except me. After dinner, while I was loading the dishwasher, James approached me again. "Mom, I've been thinking, it might be better if you left tonight instead of waiting until New Year's." I froze, a gravy-stained plate in my hand. "Tonight? On Christmas?" "It's just, Vanessa's pretty stressed about the pregnancy. Having you here, knowing you're upset, it's not good for her or the baby." "James, it's snowing outside. It's Christmas night. Where would I even go?" He pulled out his phone. I checked. "The Riverside Inn has vacancies. I can book you a week there to give you time to figure things out." In that moment, I realized my son, the little boy I'd raised alone after his father abandoned us when James was just 3, was a stranger to me now. Whatever values I thought I'd instilled in him had been buried beneath layers of entitlement and cold practicality. "Fine," I said finally, setting down the plate before I broke it. "I'll go pack." I moved through the guest room, my room, in a daze, grabbing clothes and toiletries. What do you pack when your life is being uprooted without warning? What matters when the person you sacrificed everything for decides you're disposable? As I was zipping up my suitcase, my eyes fell on the small safe I kept in the closet. Inside was something James didn't know about, something I'd never mentioned because I never imagined I'd need it. The deed to the house. The real deed, showing me as the primary owner, with James as a contingent beneficiary. When we'd purchased the house, I'd suggested putting it in both our names, since I was contributing so much to the down payment. James insisted it should be in his and Vanessa's names only. For tax purposes, he claimed. What he didn't know was that Dr. Howard Greenfield, my former boss and mentor at Northside General Hospital, had insisted on reviewing the paperwork before I signed. Howard, who'd been like a father to me over my 40-year nursing career, had immediately spotted the issue. "Ellie, this agreement gives you no protection," he'd said. "You're essentially gifting them a small fortune with nothing to show for it." Howard had his attorney draw up a different agreement, one that protected my investment by making me the primary deed holder, with a provision that ownership would transfer fully to James after 20 years or upon my death, whichever came later. James had signed it without reading the fine print, too eager to get the keys to his dream home. I never told him. I wanted to trust my son. I wanted to believe I'd never need legal protection from my own child. But Howard, who'd seen too many elderly parents taken advantage of by their children, had insisted. "Just in case," he'd said. "You never know what might happen." Now, as I pulled the document from the safe, My hands trembled with a mixture of emotions. Relief that I wasn't completely vulnerable. Heartbreak that I needed this protection at all. And, I'm ashamed to admit, a small, growing spark of anger. I tucked the deed into my purse and finished packing. When I emerged, James was waiting impatiently by the front door, car keys in hand. "I'll drive you to the hotel," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I can drive myself," I replied. "My car's in the driveway." "Actually," he hesitated, "Vanessa and I were thinking maybe you could sell your car to have some extra cash for the retirement community. Her brother needs a reliable vehicle and—" "No." The word came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't apologize. "The car stays with me." The drive to the Riverside Inn was silent and tense. Snow fell heavily, accumulating on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Christmas lights blurred through my tears as we passed house after house where families were together, celebrating, loving each other. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As James pulled up to the hotel entrance, I suddenly turned to him. "Why are you doing this? What did I do wrong?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his childhood self that it made my heart ache. "It's not about what you did wrong, Mom. It's about our family needing space to grow. Vanessa feels like you're always watching, judging her parenting. I've never once criticized how she parents Sophie. It's not what you say, it's how you look at her. Anyway," he checked his watch, "they're expecting me back for dessert with Sophie. The room's already paid for, a week like I promised. That should be enough time to sort something out." I got out without another word, pulling my suitcase from the back seat. As I watched his car drive away, the Christmas wreath hanging from my purse, a small gift from Sophie that I hadn't had the heart to leave behind, seemed to mock the entire concept of holiday spirit. The hotel room was clean, but impersonal. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my Christmas sweater, and finally let the tears come. For hours, I cried. For the decades of sacrifice that had led to this moment, for the son I thought I knew, for the uncertain future ahead of me. When the tears finally stopped, I pulled out my phone and stared at the wallpaper. A photo of James, Vanessa, Sophie, and me from last summer's vacation. We looked happy. Had it all been an illusion? I opened my contacts and scrolled to Ruth Holloway, my former neighbor and one of the few friends I'd managed to keep despite my grueling schedule as a nurse. Ruth had retired a few years before me from teaching at the local high school. We'd bonded over being single mothers who put everything into our careers and children. Despite the late hour and the holiday, she answered on the second ring. "Ellie? What's wrong?" She knew me well enough to hear the distress in my simple hello. "James kicked me out," I said, the words still feeling surreal. "Tonight, on Christmas." "He did what?" Her voice rose in disbelief. "Where are you now?" "The Riverside Inn. He's paid for a week." "Oh, how generous of him." Ruth's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Stay there tonight, but tomorrow you're coming. To my place. I have a spare room, and I've been wanting a roommate anyway. This house is too big for just me." "Ruth, I can't impose—" "It's not imposing when it's family, and you're more family to me than most of my blood relatives. Now tell me everything." As I recounted the events of the evening, Ruth listened without interrupting. When I mentioned the deed, she let out a low whistle. "Howard was a smart man," she said finally. "So what are you going to do?" I touched the document in my purse. "I don't know yet. Part of me wants to march back there tomorrow and throw them all out, but that's not who you are," Ruth finished for me. "At least, not who you've been. The question is, who do you need to be now, Ellie? Because the woman who puts everyone else first got her heart broken tonight." Her words hung in the air between us. Who did I need to be now? The loving mother who forgave everything? The rightful homeowner asserting her legal claim? The abandoned parent fighting for what she deserved? I need time to think, I said finally. Take all the time you need at my place. No pressure, no timelines. After we hung up, I sat in the silent room, listening to the distant sounds of holiday celebrations from other rooms. For 34 years, I'd defined myself as James's mother. I'd worked extra shifts to pay for his braces, his sports equipment, his college education. I'd postponed dating, travel, my own dreams, all to ensure he had everything he needed. Now, at 62, I had to redefine myself. And as the first hints of dawn broke through the curtains, I realized that process would begin with standing up for myself in a way I never had before. I may have been kicked out on Christmas Day, but I had a secret deed to my son's house. And while I'd always taught James that family came first, it was time for him to learn another lesson. Actions have consequences. Just before falling into an exhausted sleep, I reached for my phone and sent a text to Diana Mendez, a property attorney I'd met through Howard before he passed. It was brief and to the point. Need to discuss a property deed urgently. Are you available tomorrow? Her response came almost immediately, despite the holiday. For you, Ellie, always. 10 a.m. at my office? I confirmed the appointment and closed my eyes, knowing that when I woke up, I would be starting a journey I never expected to take, one that would either mend my relationship with my son or end it completely. Either way, I would no longer be the woman who was kicked out on Christmas Day. I would be Eleanor Mitchell, reclaiming her power, her home, and her life. The morning after Christmas dawned gray and cold. I woke to the unfamiliar ceiling of the Riverside Inn, momentarily confused until the events of the previous night came rushing back. My phone buzzed with a text from Ruth. Packed breakfast. Coming to get you at 9. No arguments. I smiled despite everything. Ruth had always been like that, direct, determined, and fiercely loyal. We'd met 15 years ago when I moved into the apartment complex where she lived. Both of us were single mothers working demanding jobs, and we'd quickly formed a bond over late-night cups of tea and shared childcare emergencies. I showered and dressed mechanically, putting on the one decent outfit I'd managed to grab during my hasty packing. The rest of my clothes were still in James's house, my house according to the deed safely tucked in my purse. The weight of that document felt both reassuring and terrifying. It represented power I'd never intended to use. Ruth arrived precisely at 9, bustling into my hotel room with a thermos of coffee and a bag of still warm muffins. You look terrible, she announced without preamble. Good morning to you too, I replied, attempting a smile. Drink this. She handed me the coffee. Then we're going to see that lawyer friend of yours, and after that, you're coming home with me. No detours, no second thoughts, no calling James to try to fix things. I have an appointment with Diana at 10. Good. I'm driving you there. Ruth had always been the voice of reason when I was too soft, too forgiving. While I'd spent years making excuses for James's increasingly self-centered behavior, she'd seen the pattern forming long before I was willing to acknowledge it. In the car, as the windshield wipers pushed away the remnants of last night's snow, Ruth asked the question I'd been avoiding. What do you want out of this, Ellie? Really want? I stared out the window at the holiday decorations that now seemed hollow and performative. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to forgive and forget, to find another place to live, and maintain some kind of relationship with James and Sophie. And the other part? The other part wants to show him there are consequences to treating people like disposable napkins. Ruth nodded approvingly. That's the part I want to hear more from. Diana Mendez's office was one of the few open on the day after Christmas. When Howard had first introduced us 3 years ago, I'd been struck by her no-nonsense efficiency. At 45, she'd already built a reputation as one of the most respected property attorneys in Riverside Heights. Her handshake was firm, her expression warm but professional as she ushered Ruth and me into her office. "Ellie, it's good to see you, though I'm sorry about the circumstances." She glanced at Ruth questioningly. "This is Ruth Holloway, my closest friend," I explained. "She knows everything." Diana nodded and gestured for us to sit. "Tell me what's happened." I recounted the events of Christmas evening, keeping my voice as steady as possible. When I finished, I removed the deed from my purse and placed it on her desk. "Howard had you draw this up 5 years ago. James doesn't know I'm the primary owner." Diana examined the document, nodding slowly. "Howard always was thorough. This is ironclad, Ellie. The house is legally yours, with James as a contingent. Beneficiary only. You have every right to reclaim it." "What exactly does that mean? Could I actually evict my own son?" Diana leaned back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. "Legally speaking, yes. James and Vanessa have been living there with your permission. You could revoke that permission and require them to vacate the property." The thought made my stomach churn. Evict my own child? The boy I'd raised alone? The young man whose graduation had been the proudest day of my life? "There are other options," Diana continued, sensing my discomfort. "You could negotiate a formal rental agreement. You could request they buy out your interest in the property at current market value. Or you could maintain the status quo but ensure they understand the actual ownership structure." "Which would give her leverage without making her homeless?" Ruth interjected. Diana nodded. "Exactly." "How much is the house worth now?" I asked quietly. Diana pulled up a real estate website on her computer. "Based on recent sales in that neighborhood and the improvements James has made, I'd estimate around $650,000. The number hung in the air between us. My $120,000 investment had more, then doubled in value, based solely on the real estate market. "So if James wanted to buy me out," I began, "you'd be entitled to at least $240,000, possibly more depending on how we structured the agreement." $240,000, enough to secure my future, to find a nice place of my own, to never have to worry about ending up dependent on anyone again. "He doesn't have that kind of money," I said. "Not liquid, anyway." "They could get a mortgage," Ruth pointed out. "That's what most people do when they buy houses." The irony wasn't lost on me. James worked as a financial advisor, helping other people manage their money while apparently forgetting every lesson I'd taught him about treating people with dignity and respect. "I need time to think," I said finally. Diana handed me a folder. "These are your options, outlined formally. Review them, and we can talk again in a few days. Whatever you decide, Ellie, remember this. You did nothing wrong. You're not the villain for protecting your interests." As we left Diana's office, Ruth linked her arm through mine. "How about lunch? You barely touched those muffins." The Copper Kettle Cafe was one of the few places open. The post-Christmas lull meant we had our pick of tables, and we settled into a quiet corner booth. I ordered soup more out of habit than hunger. "You're thinking too hard," Ruth said, watching me stir my soup without eating it. I can practically hear the gears grinding. "I'm trying to imagine what happens after. If I assert my rights to the house, do I lose my son forever? If I don't, am I teaching him it's okay to treat me this way?" "You already lost the son you thought you had," Ruth said gently. "The James who kicked his mother out on Christmas Day isn't the boy you raised." Her words struck me with unexpected force. The James I thought I knew. The sensitive child who'd once spent his allowance on a Mother's Day gift. The teenager who'd defended me when his friends made comments about my worn-out nursing shoes. The young man who'd tearfully thanked me at his college graduation. That James seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone cold and calculating. "Maybe Vanessa changed him," I suggested half-heartedly. Ruth shook her head. "People don't change that fundamentally because of a spouse. They reveal who they always had the capacity to become. The question is, who are you going to become in response? Before I could answer, the cafe door opened, and Patricia Walker stepped in. Vanessa's mother spotted me immediately, her expression shifting from surprise to something like triumph. "Eleanor," she said, approaching our table with exaggerated concern. "I heard about what happened. Such a shame when families can't work things out during the holidays." I felt Ruth stiffen beside me. "Hello, Patricia," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "This is my friend Ruth." Patricia barely acknowledged Ruth with a nod. "I understand you're looking for a place to stay, the Whispering Pines retirement community where my aunt lives has very reasonable rates for seniors on fixed incomes." The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. In Patricia's world, I was just a retired nurse with limited means, someone to be pitied at best, looked down upon at worst. "Thank you, but I've already arranged accommodations," I said, surprising myself with my calm tone. Patricia raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Where?" "That's not really your concern, is it?" Ruth interjected. Patricia's smile tightened. "I'm only trying to help. James is worried about his mother being alone at her age. The same James who'd put me in a hotel on Christmas night was now worried about me." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "Well, you can tell James that his mother is just fine," I said, reaching for my purse. "In fact, I've been consulting with my attorney this morning about some property matters that may interest him." Patricia's expression shifted. "Property matters?" I withdrew the deed from my purse and slid it across the table. "It seems there's been some confusion about who actually owns the house on Cedar Lane." Patricia scanned the document, her face paling slightly. "This must be a mistake. James said the house is in his and Vanessa's names." "James was mistaken," I said, taking back the deed. "As you can see, I'm the primary owner. I've simply allowed James and Vanessa to live there." But they've been making the mortgage payments," Patricia stammered. "On a mortgage that represents less than half the property's value, thanks to my substantial down payment," I corrected her. "A down payment that James now seems to have forgotten about, along with basic human decency." Patricia's shock quickly hardened into something uglier. "So you're going to hold this over their heads? Use it to force your way back into their home? That's manipulative, Eleanor." I felt something shift inside me, a lifetime of accommodating. Others, of putting myself last, finally giving way to a steel core I hadn't known I possessed. "No, Patricia, manipulation is convincing an elderly parent to invest her life savings in your home and then throwing her out on Christmas. What I'm doing is simply standing up for myself." I stood, leaving my soup untouched. "Please let James know I'll be in touch through my attorney. I believe Diana Mendez's card is also in that folder. She'll be handling all communications going forward." Ruth followed me out, waiting until we were in the car to let out a whoop of triumph. "Did you see her face? I thought Patricia was going to swallow her pearl necklace whole." Despite everything, I laughed, a rusty sound I barely recognized as my own. When was the last time I'd laughed freely, without worrying about pleasing others or keeping the peace? That felt— I searched for the right word. "Empowering?" Ruth suggested. "Terrifying," I corrected her. "But also right." As Ruth drove us to her house, I felt the knot that had been tightening in my chest since last night begin to loosen slightly. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't at the mercy of a son who'd forgotten what it meant to be family. Ruth's house was a cozy 2-bedroom, craftsman on a quiet street lined with oak trees. I'd visited many times over the years, but never as someone seeking refuge. "The spare room is all made up," she said, carrying my suitcase inside. "I put fresh towels in the bathroom and cleared out half the closet. Stay as long as you need." "Ruth, I can't thank you enough." She waved away my gratitude. "You'd do the same for me. Now I'm making tea and we're going to map out a strategy." As Ruth busied herself in the kitchen, my phone buzzed with a text from James. I just got a call from Patricia. What are you doing, Mom? This isn't like you. The message stung with its familiar accusation that standing up for myself was somehow out of character, inappropriate, wrong. And perhaps it was unlike the Ellie Mitchell who had always put others first, who had smiled through James's increasingly selfish behaviors, who had rationalized his dismissive treatment as just his way. But that Ellie had spent Christmas night in a hotel room. I typed back simply, I'm doing what I should have done years ago. Diana Mendez will be in touch about the house. His response was immediate. You're really going to sue your own son? Over a misunderstanding? Misunderstanding. As if kicking me out on Christmas had been a simple communication error. I showed the text to Ruth when she returned with the T. Block him, she advised. All communication through Diana, just like you told Patricia. The moment you engage directly, he'll try to manipulate you with guilt and emotional appeals. He's still my son, I said weakly. And you're still his mother. But that didn't stop him from throwing you out like yesterday's trash. Block him, Ellie. At least for now. With trembling fingers, I did as she suggested, feeling both terrible and relieved as I confirmed the blocking. For the first time in 34 years, I was intentionally cutting off communication with my son. Now what? I asked, cradling the warm tea mug between my hands. Now we make a plan for your future that doesn't revolve around James. Over the next several hours, Ruth and I talked through my options. My nursing pension would cover basic expenses, but not much more. The potential buyout from the house would provide security, but I needed to decide what I really wanted. If money weren't an issue, Ruth asked, what would you do? Where would you live? I closed my eyes, allowing myself to envision a future, untethered from obligations and others' expectations. I'd find a small place with good light for painting. Ruth's eyebrows shot up. Painting? Since when do you paint? I felt my cheeks flush. I used to, years ago, before James was born. I've sketched a bit over the years, but never had the time or space to really pursue it. What else? I'd volunteer at the hospitals. Pediatric ward. Not as a nurse, but as a reader or a companion. I always wanted to do that after retirement, but when James suggested I move in to help with Sophie, Ruth nodded, understanding. You put your plans on hold. Again. I'd take that cooking class at the community center, I continued, warming to the exercise. The one focused on international cuisines, and maybe join that hiking group for seniors. So you have a life waiting for you, Ruth said with satisfaction. A life that has nothing to do with being James's convenient childcare provider. Put that way, it sounded so simple. But decades of putting my son first had created deep grooves in my thinking, pathways of guilt and obligation that wouldn't be easily redirected. What if I'm overreacting? I asked. Maybe I should call him, try to work things out. Ruth set down her mug with a decisive click. Ellie Mitchell, listen to me. You are not overreacting. You were kicked out of your own house on Christmas, day after investing a small fortune in it. You have legal recourse, financial leverage, and a friend who's telling you it's time to put yourself first for once. The only question is whether you're brave enough to do it. Was I brave enough? The answer to that question would determine everything that followed. My phone buzzed again. An email this time from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, regarding Eleanor Mitchell and the Cedar Lane property. With a growing sense of unease, I opened it to find a message from Tyler Jenkins, James's friend and colleague. Dear Mrs. Mitchell, I hope this message finds you well, despite the difficult circumstances. James asked me to reach out as an objective third party. He believes there's been a misunderstanding about the house ownership that could be resolved amicably, without involving attorneys. Would you be willing to meet tomorrow to discuss? Regards, Tyler Jenkins, CFP-R. I showed the email to Ruth, who snorted derisively. Objective third party? Please. He's James's drinking buddy and works under him at the firm. He's about as objective as Vanessa would be. How should I respond? You shouldn't. Forward it to Diana and let her handle it. That's what you're paying her for. I did as Ruth suggested, adding a note asking Diana if she thought meeting with Tyler would be worthwhile. Her response came within the hour. Ellie, I strongly advise against any meeting without legal representation. Based on my experience, this is likely an attempt to pressure you into a less favorable arrangement. I've taken the liberty of responding to Mr. Jenkins, informing him that all communications should be directed to me. I've also contacted a professional appraiser to assess the current market value of the property to strengthen our negotiating position. We'll speak soon. Diana. The rest of the day passed in a strange limbo. I unpacked my meager belongings in Ruth's spare room, trying to make it feel like something more than a temporary shelter. Ruth insisted on cooking dinner, a gesture so kind it nearly brought me to tears again. And we watched old movies until late, deliberately avoiding further discussion of James or the house. That night, as I lay in an unfamiliar bed staring at shadows on an unfamiliar ceiling, I allowed myself to really feel the pain of James's betrayal. Not just the Christmas eviction, but the years of subtle dismissals, of taking my sacrifices for granted, of treating me as a resource rather than a person. When had it started? Maybe in his late teens, when his athletic achievements and academic honors had shifted his perception of himself in relation to me. Maybe in college, when he'd begun moving in social circles where family wealth and connections mattered more than character. Or maybe when he'd met Vanessa, whose family viewed status and financial success as the ultimate measures of worth. Whenever it had begun, it had culminated in that terrible moment in the dining room, when my son had looked at me not as the mother who'd given him everything, but as an inconvenience to be managed. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I would not allow that moment to define the rest of my life. I would use the legal advantage I had, the deed Howard had insisted on, not primarily for revenge, but for restoration. Not to punish James, but to ensure I could build a future where I would never again be vulnerable to such casual cruelty. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. James's attorney contacted me this morning. They're requesting a meeting tomorrow, at 3 p.m. I recommend we accept. James had hired an attorney already. The knowledge should have hurt, but instead it cemented my resolve. This was no longer about a mother and son disagreement. It was a legal battle over property rights. And, for once, I had the stronger position. I texted back my agreement to the meeting, then set my phone aside and went to find Ruth. She was already in the kitchen, making coffee and toast. I heard you moving around early, she said, sliding a mug toward me. Rough night? Clarifying. Night, I corrected her. Diana texted, James has an attorney and they want to meet tomorrow. Ruth raised her eyebrows. That was fast. Patricia must have lit a fire under them. Probably. I took a sip of coffee, savoring its bitter warmth. Ruth, I need to do something today, and I could use your support. Name it. I need to go back to the house to get the rest of my things. I know James and Vanessa both work today, and Sophie will be at her holiday day camp. I still have my key. Ruth studied me for a moment. Are you sure that's wise, legally speaking? Diana said I have every right to enter my own property. I just want my clothes, my mother's jewelry, my photo albums. Things that are unquestionably mine. Ruth nodded decisively. We'll take my car. And if anyone questions us, I'll remind them whose name is on the deed. 2 hours later, we pulled into the driveway of the Cedar Lane house. The Christmas wreath still hung on the door, and holiday lights rimmed the windows. It looked exactly the same as it had 2 days ago, when it had still been my home. My hand trembled slightly as I inserted the key into the lock. Would they have changed the locks already? But the key turned smoothly, and the door swung open. Inside, evidence of Christmas still lingered. Discarded wrapping paper peeking from a trash bag, the tree lights blinking in the corner, Sophie's new toys scattered. Across the living room floor. I moved through the space like a ghost, acutely aware that I was now a visitor in what had been my home. The guest room, my room, looked untouched. My bed was still unmade from Christmas morning, when I'd risen early to start the turkey. The novel I'd been reading still lay on the nightstand, a bookmark indicating where my old life had ended and this new, uncertain one had begun. Ruth stood in the doorway, watching as I methodically packed my belongings. Clothes into suitcases, books into boxes, photo albums wrapped carefully in sweaters for protection. My mother's jewelry case tucked safely into my purse. "Take the painting." "Too," Ruth said, pointing to a small landscape on the wall. "Didn't you say your father painted that?" I nodded, carefully removing it from its hook. The painting had been one of the few things I'd kept when I sold my condo to help James with the down payment. At the time, he'd said the colors didn't match his and Vanessa's aesthetic, so it had been relegated to the guest room. As I wrapped the painting in a blanket, I noticed something on the bedside table I'd nearly overlooked. A small clay handprint Sophie had made for me last Mother's Day. For Grandma Ellie, she'd written in wobbly letters around the edge. I added it to my collection of treasures. We were nearly finished loading Ruth's car when another vehicle pulled into the driveway. My heart sank as I recognized Patricia's silver Mercedes. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, emerging from her car with the righteous indignation of someone catching burglars in the act. "James said you might try something like this." "I'm collecting my personal belongings," I replied calmly, though my pulse had accelerated. "From my house." Patricia pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. This is breaking and entering." Ruth stepped forward, her 5'3" frame somehow imposing as she faced down Patricia. "It's not breaking and entering when you have a key and your name is on the deed. But please call the police. I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear how James and Vanessa tried to evict the legal owner of this property on Christmas Day." Patricia faltered, her finger hovering over her phone screen. "You're bluffing. That deed you showed me is a fake." I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and showed her the message from Diana confirming the validity of the deed, along with the attached property records from the county assessor's office. "Would you like to see the original again? I'm happy to have the police authenticate it when they arrive." Patricia's face flushed with anger, but the threat had lost its power. "This isn't over, Eleanor. James and Vanessa have rights too." "Yes, they do," I agreed. "The right to fair treatment under the law. The same law that recognizes me as the primary owner of this property. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're leaving." As we drove away, Ruth let out a low whistle. "Ellie Mitchell, where has this version of you been hiding all these years?" I stared out the window at the passing houses, each one representing a family with its own complex web of love, obligation, and power dynamics. "She's been waiting for permission to exist," I said quietly. Permission I finally gave myself. Back at Ruth's house, we unloaded my belongings into the spare room, which now felt more like a sanctuary than a way station. As I unpacked, I came across a photo I'd almost forgotten. James at his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride and possibility. "We were happy then," I murmured, showing the photo to Ruth. "What happened?" Ruth studied the image, her expression softening. "Life happened, choices happened, both his and yours." "What do you mean mine?" "Ellie, you're my dearest friend, but you've always been too willing to be a doormat. You taught James that your needs came last, that your sacrifices were expected rather than appreciated. You didn't demand respect, so he learned he didn't need to give it." Her words stung with their truth. How many times had I swallowed my own desires to accommodate James? How often had I waved away his thoughtlessness with excuses about him being busy or stressed? "It's not too late," Ruth continued, more gently now. Tomorrow, when you meet with the attorneys, remember what you're fighting for. Not just financial security, but the right to be treated with basic dignity. That night, I dreamt of the house on Cedar Lane. Not as it was now, filled with Vanessa's trendy furniture and impractical decorative items, but as it might have been if I'd claimed my rightful place there from the beginning. In the dream, the spare room was my art studio, filled with light and canvases. The kitchen featured my collection of well-worn cookbooks instead of the pristine, never-used ones Vanessa displayed. The backyard had a vegetable garden instead of the manicured but sterile landscape James preferred. I woke feeling strangely energized, as if the dream had shown me not just what I'd lost, but what I might still create for myself. A life authentic to who I was, not defined by servicing others' needs. Diana called as I was having breakfast. Ellie, I've been reviewing your options before today's meeting. Based on current market value and your initial investment, I believe we should ask for a buyout of $275,000. The figure took my breath away. That's more than twice what I put in. It reflects your investment plus its appreciation over time. Remember, if you chose to evict them and sell the property yourself, you'd likely clear even more. This is actually quite reasonable. Will James be able to afford that? They'll need to take out a new mortgage or use savings. But given their income bracket and the equity already in the house, it's certainly feasible. After we hung up, I sat quietly, contemplating what $275,000 would mean for my future. Financial independence, a small house of my own, perhaps. Freedom, from ever having to depend on James's goodwill again. Most importantly, it would mean that my decades of sacrifice and hard work would finally transform into something tangible that benefited me directly. Ruth drove me to Diana's office for the 3 o'clock meeting, giving my hand a squeeze before I went inside. "Remember who you are," she said simply. Diana was waiting in the lobby, professional and poised in a charcoal suit. "James and his attorney are already here," she informed me. "Are you ready?" I took a deep breath and nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. As we walked into the conference room, I caught my first glimpse of James since Christmas night. He looked tired, the circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. Beside him sat a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who rose to introduce himself as Gerald Hoffman, James's attorney. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said smoothly, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I believe we can reach an amicable resolution that serves everyone's interests." Diana gestured for me to take a seat beside her, opposite James and Gerald. "We're certainly open to discussion, provided my client's rights are fully recognized and respected." James's eyes met mine briefly before darting away. Was that shame I saw? Or merely calculation? Gerald opened a folder. "We've reviewed your deed, and while we acknowledge Mrs. Mitchell's technical ownership, we believe the spirit of the arrangement was clearly for James and Vanessa to be the primary residents and beneficiaries of the property." "The spirit of the arrangement," Diana replied coolly, "was for Ellie's substantial investment to be protected. An investment that made it possible for James and Vanessa to purchase a home they otherwise could not have afforded." Gerald cleared his throat. "Nevertheless, they've been making the mortgage payments for 5 years. They've invested in improvements. They've built a life there." "With Mrs. Mitchell's blessing and support," Diana countered. "Support that was abruptly and cruelly terminated on Christmas Day when they evicted her without notice." James flinched, visibly at the word evicted. "We didn't evict her," he protested, speaking for the first time. "We asked her to find her own place. That's normal. Adult children aren't obligated to house their parents indefinitely." I felt a surge of anger so intense it momentarily took my breath away. "Is that what you think happened, James? That you were generously housing me? Not that I gave you $120,000 of my life savings to buy that house in the first place? James had the grace to look uncomfortable. The money was a gift. You said so yourself. A gift made with the understanding that I would always have a home. There, if I needed it. An understanding you violated the moment it became inconvenient for you. Diana placed a gentle hand on my arm, a reminder to stay calm and let her handle the negotiation. Here's where we stand, she said firmly. Ellie is the legal owner of the property. She has several options, including requiring James and Vanessa to vacate so she can sell it at full market value. Gerald's expression tightened. That would be unnecessarily punitive. Perhaps, Diana acknowledged, which is why she's willing to offer them the opportunity to buy out her interest instead. Based on current market value and her initial investment, we're asking for $275,000. James's face paled. That's impossible. We don't have that kind of money. You have equity in the house, Diana pointed out. You could refinance. Given your combined income, it should be quite manageable. Or, Gerald interjected, we could negotiate a more reasonable figure, say $150,000, reflecting the original investment plus a modest return. Diana smiled thinly. The current offer is more than fair, considering the circumstances. Mrs. Mitchell could legally demand the full value of the house, minus only the equity James and Vanessa have built through their mortgage payments. The negotiation continued for nearly an hour, a clinical dissection of monetary value that somehow failed to address the deeper breach, the broken trust between mother and son. Finally, Gerald asked for a brief recess to confer privately with God's James. Diana and I stepped out into the hallway. They'll counter at around $225,000, Diana predicted, which is actually quite reasonable. I recommend we accept if they offer it. This feels so transactional, I said. Property disputes usually are, Diana replied gently. But remember, this isn't just about money, it's about securing your future and ensuring you're never in such a vulnerable position again. When we returned to the conference room, Gerald presented their counteroffer, $230,000, to be paid within 90 days, with a formal transfer of the deed to James and Vanessa. Upon payment, Diana looked to me for approval. I nodded slowly. We accept the financial terms, Diana said, with one condition. Ellie retains the right to live in the house until the payment is made in full. James started to protest, but Gerald quieted him with a look. That's acceptable, he agreed. We'll draw up the paperwork. As the meeting concluded with handshakes, James lingered, clearly wanting to speak with me privately. Diana gave me a questioning look. It's all right, I told her. I'll meet you outside in a few minutes. When we were alone, James seemed to struggle to find the right words. Mom, I didn't want it to come to this. Neither did I replied honestly. But we're here now. You could have just talked to me about the deed instead of getting lawyers involved. The unfairness of his statement was breathtaking. James, you threw me out on Christmas Day. You left me in a hotel. When exactly was I supposed to have this conversation with you? He had the grace to look ashamed. It wasn't like that. Vanessa was stressed about the pregnancy, and her parents were putting pressure on us, and stop. My voice was quiet but firm. No more excuses, no more justifications. What you did was wrong, and deep down, you know it. James fell silent, his expression unreadable. I'll be moving back into the house tomorrow, I continued. Just until your payment clears. Then I'll find my own place, and you'll never have to worry about your mother inconveniencing you again. Mom, we're done here, James. The lawyers will handle the rest. As I walked out of the conference room, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The $230,000 would secure my future financially, but the cost had been my relationship with my son, Yet even that painful knowledge couldn't completely overshadow the sense that I had finally stood up for myself after a lifetime of putting others first. Ruth was waiting in the lobby, her expression anxious. "How did it go?" "They're buying me out for $230,000, I said. "I'll be staying at the house until the payment clears, then finding my own place." Ruth's eyes widened. "Ellie, that's wonderful." "Well, not the whole situation, obviously, but the outcome. You'll be financially secure." "Yes," I agreed, the reality of it still sinking in. "For the first time in my life, I'll have more than enough." As we stepped outside into the winter afternoon, I tilted my face toward the pale sun. Ahead lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility. The chance to finally discover who Eleanor Mitchell might become when she was no longer defined primarily as James's mother. The hidden advantage Howard had secured for me had done more than protect my financial investment. It had given me the leverage to reclaim my sense of self-worth, to demand the respect I deserved, and for that, I would be forever grateful. The following day, I stood on the porch of the Cedar Lane house, my house at least for now, key in hand, steeling myself for what would inevitably be an uncomfortable reunion. Ruth had offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to face alone. The confrontation with James and the negotiation with the attorneys had awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. A conviction that I deserved better, and the courage to demand it. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was silent, but evidence of hasty cleaning efforts was everywhere. Toys tucked away, dishes put up, counters wiped down. Someone had been preparing for my arrival. "Hello?" I called out, setting down my suitcase in the entryway. After a moment, Vanessa appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. Her expression was carefully neutral, though the slight tightness around her eyes betrayed her discomfort. "Eleanor," she said with a stiff nod, "James said you'd be moving back in temporarily." "Just until the payment clears," I confirmed, maintaining the same neutral tone. "I'll be staying in the guest room." "Sophie doesn't know yet," Vanessa said abruptly, "about the deed or the money or any of it. We'd appreciate if you didn't mention it to her." The request stung. They wanted to maintain their image as the benevolent adults allowing poor grandma to stay with them, rather than acknowledging the reality that I was the actual owner of the house they'd been living in. "I won't discuss adult matters with Sophie," I agreed, "but I won't lie to her if she asks me directly why I left on Christmas." Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine. She'll be home from day camp at 4. James won't be back until after dinner. He has client meetings." Or perhaps he was simply avoiding me. Either way, it gave me a few hours to settle back in without having to face him. I carried my suitcase to the guest room, which looked exactly as I'd left it after, collecting my things. The bed had been made with fresh linens, and the closet stood empty, ready for my modest wardrobe. It felt strange to be moving back into a space that had been mine just days ago, now feeling like a visitor in my own home. As I unpacked, I noticed subtle changes that had been made in my absence. The small desk where I'd kept my personal papers had been cleared off, the drawer emptied. The reading chair in the corner had been repositioned to face the window rather than the television. Small marks of territorial reclamation, as if they'd tried to erase evidence of my previous occupancy. I restored the chair to its original position and arranged my belongings precisely as they had been before, a quiet assertion of my right to exist in this space. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone to call Ruth. "I'm in," I told her when she answered. "No James yet, just Vanessa, chilly but civil." "How does it feel to be back?" Ruth asked. I glanced around the room, considering. Like staying in a hotel room that happens to contain all my possessions. Familiar but not comfortable. 90 days, Ruth reminded me. Then you're free to find your own place. Somewhere that feels like yours from the start. 90 days suddenly seemed like an eternity. 3 months of awkward meals and strained conversations. 3 months of watching Vanessa and James exchange looks when they thought I wasn't watching. 3 months of being reminded that the family I thought we were had been largely a product of my own wishful thinking. But also, I realized, 3 months to plan my next chapter carefully. The buyout money wouldn't arrive as a lump sum until the end of that period. I would use this time to research neighborhoods, consult with financial advisors, and prepare for true independence. "I'll start looking at properties next week," I told Ruth. "Nothing fancy, but somewhere with good light for painting." "That's my girl," Ruth said approvingly. "Forward focus, not backward." After hanging up, I walked through the house, reacquainting myself with the space. In the kitchen, I noticed Vanessa had rearranged the cupboards, moving the everyday dishes to a higher shelf that would require a step stool for me to reach, a passive-aggressive touch that spoke volumes about our new living arrangement. I was tempted to move everything back, but decided against it. This was no longer about petty power struggles over cupboard organization. I had won the war that mattered, the legal and financial one. I could afford to surrender these minor skirmishes. At precisely 4 o'clock, the front door burst open and Sophie ran in, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. "Mom, they let us make snow globes today and—" She stopped abruptly when she saw me standing in the hallway. Her face lit up with genuine delight. "Grandma Ellie, you're back!" She flung herself at me with such force that I staggered slightly, wrapping my arms around her small body. The unquestioning warmth of her welcome brought tears to my eyes. "I missed you," she whispered fiercely against my sweater. "Mom said you had to go away for a while." "I did," I said carefully, aware of Vanessa watching us from the kitchen doorway. "But I'm back now, at least for a little while." Sophie pulled back, her young face solemn. "Are you staying for good? Mom said you might be getting your own apartment." "Eventually," I confirmed, "but not right away." Relief washed over her. "Teachers. Good. Christmas wasn't the same after you left. Dad wouldn't let me open your present." I frowned, confused. "My present?" "The one you put under the tree for me. He said we should wait until you came back." I glanced at Vanessa, who shrugged slightly. "It's still under the tree. We took everything else down, but Sophie insisted we leave that." Something in my heart softened slightly. Whether James had kept the gift there out of guilt or a genuine desire to preserve some tradition between Sophie and me, it suggested that perhaps not all family bonds had been severed. Sophie tugged at my hand. "Can we open it now, please?" "Of course," I agreed, allowing her to pull me toward the living room. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, most of its ornaments already removed, looking forlorn and forgotten. A single wrapped package remained beneath it, the art set I'd carefully selected for Sophie, who had shown interest in drawing during our summer afternoons together. Sophie tore into the wrapping paper with typical 8-year-old enthusiasm. When she revealed the professional quality-colored pencils, sketch pad, and instruction book, her eyes widened. "This is like the ones real artists use," she breathed. "Can you teach me how to draw, Grandma Ellie?" "I'd love that," I said, genuinely moved by her reaction. "Maybe we could start tomorrow after school?" "Yes." She threw her arms around. "Me again?" "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Over her shoulder I caught Vanessa's expression, a complicated mixture of irritation and resignation. Having me back in the house meant I would inevitably rebuild my relationship with Sophie, something that clearly made her uncomfortable. The evening proceeded with a strained normalcy. Vanessa prepared dinner while Sophie showed me her day camp projects. We ate at the dining table, Sophie chattering excitedly about her friends and activities, seemingly oblivious to the tension between Vanessa and me. James didn't return until after Sophie had gone to bed. I was reading in the guest room when I heard the front door open, followed by hushed, urgent conversation between him and Vanessa. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone suggested disagreement. A few minutes later, a soft knock came at my door. "Come in," I called, setting aside my book. James entered hesitantly, looking uncomfortable in his own home. He had loosened his tie but still wore his office clothes, as if keeping the armor of professionalism between us. "Mom," he said, his voice formal. "I just wanted to check that you're settling back in okay." "As well as can be expected," I replied neutrally. He shifted his weight, clearly struggling with what to say next. "Look, I know this is awkward, but we can make it work for the next few months, for Sophie's sake." "For Sophie's sake," I echoed, nodding slowly. "Of course." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, filled with all the things neither of us seemed ready to address: his betrayal, my legal countermove, the money that would soon change hands. "Vanessa says you and Sophie made plans to draw together tomorrow," he finally said. "If that's all right with you," I replied, a hint of challenge in my voice. This was still my house, after all. James had the grace to look embarrassed. "Of course. Sophie missed you. She didn't understand why you left so suddenly." "And what did you tell her?" I asked, genuinely curious about how they had explained my Christmas night eviction to an 8-year-old. "That you needed some space, that adults sometimes need time apart even when they love each other." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his younger self that it made my heart ache. I didn't know what else to say. "You could have told her the truth," I suggested quietly, "that you asked me to leave because you didn't want me living here anymore." James flinched. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't about not wanting you." "Please don't," I cut him off. "Don't try to rewrite what happened. You made it very clear on Christmas Day that I was no longer welcome here. Let's at least be honest about that much." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. I should have handled it differently. The timing was. It was terrible. It wasn't an apology, not really. More of an acknowledgement that the execution had been flawed, not that the decision itself had been wrong. "Yes," I agreed simply. "You should have." Another silence fell, this one heavier than the last. "Well," James said finally, backing toward the door. "Good night, then." "Good night, James." After he left, I sat motionless for several minutes, processing the interaction. There had been no real reconciliation, no heartfelt apology, no recognition of the deeper breach in our relationship. Just an awkward truce for the sake of getting through the next 90 days. Perhaps that was all I could expect now. Perhaps the mother-son relationship I had cherished for decades had been irreparably damaged the moment James chose Vanessa's comfort over my well-being. The thought brought a fresh wave of grief, but also, surprisingly, a kind of clarity. If James could no longer be counted on to be the loving son I had raised, then I needed to build a life that didn't depend on that relationship for fulfillment or security. The $230,000 buyout would give me the financial means to do just that. The next morning, I woke early, slipping out of the guest room before anyone else was stirring. In the kitchen, I made coffee and carried it to the small back porch, watching the winter sunrise paint the sky in delicate pinks and golds. The backyard looked barren in the winter light, the carefully manicured lawn dormant, the decorative shrubs reduced to stark silhouettes. Vanessa had hired a professional landscaper to create what she called an entertainment space, replacing the small vegetable garden I had started when I first moved in. I sipped my coffee, remembering how Sophie had delighted in helping me plant tomatoes and snap peas, how she had squealed with joy when the first green shoots appeared. Those memories belonged to a different life now, one where I had believed myself an integral part of this family rather than an inconvenient appendage. By the time James and Vanessa emerged, dressed for work, I had prepared a simple breakfast of toast and fruit, my way of asserting normality in an abnormal situation. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "Coffee's fresh." James mumbled a greeting, pouring himself a cup while avoiding eye contact. Vanessa merely nodded, checking her phone as she grabbed a piece of toast. Sophie's lunch is packed, I told them, and I've signed up to pick her up from school today, so you don't need to arrange for the after-school program. Vanessa's head snapped up. We have a routine, Eleanor. Sophie goes to the after-school program until one of us picks her up at 5:30. I thought I could save you the expense, I replied mildly, since I'm here anyway. That's not the point. We have systems in place, schedules that work for our family. Family. There was that word again, used as a boundary marker to exclude me. I'm happy to respect your systems, I said, keeping my voice level. But I'll be living here for the next 3 months, and I'd like to spend time with my granddaughter. Surely we can find a compromise that works for everyone. James cleared, his throat clearly uncomfortable with the tension. Maybe Mom could pick Sophie up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Those are your late days at the office anyway, Vanessa. Vanessa shot him a look of betrayal, but seemed to realize she was outnumbered. Fine, Tuesdays and Thursdays, but please let the school know in advance. Of course, I agreed. A small victory, but significant in establishing that I wouldn't be sidelined completely during my remaining time in the house. After they left for work, I called Diana to update her on the living situation. Everything's proceeding as expected with the paperwork, she assured me. The appraisal came in even higher than we anticipated, which strengthens our position. Are you managing okay living with them? It's tense, I admitted, but I can handle it for 90 days. Have you given any thought to what you'll do after? Where you might want to live? The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on the immediate legal battle that I hadn't fully considered what would come next. I need to start looking at options, I said. Something small but comfortable. Ideally with space for painting. I might have some suggestions, Diana offered. A client of mine recently renovated a building downtown into artist lofts. They're designed specifically for creative types. Good natural light, open floor plans, and there's a strong sense of community among the residents. That sounds wonderful, I said, surprised by how much the idea appealed to me, but probably out of my price range. Not necessarily. There are a few units set aside at reduced rates for seniors and retired professionals. I could arrange a viewing if you're interested. I'd like that very much, I said, feeling a flutter of excitement at the prospect. Thank you, Diana. It's the least I can do. Howard would have wanted to see you settled somewhere that nurtures your talents. After we hung up, I spent the morning researching artist communities and retirement options in Riverside Heights. There were more possibilities than I had realized, from the downtown lofts Diana had mentioned to small cottages in creative enclaves on the outskirts of town. Places where I might find not just housing but community, purpose, and the chance to explore interests I had set aside decades ago. By the time I left to pick up Sophie from school, I had scheduled 3 property viewings for the following week, small steps toward my new life, each one making that life feel more tangible, more possible. Sophie's face lit up when she saw me waiting outside her classroom. Grandma Ellie, you came to get me. I sure did, I said, hugging her. And guess what? I'll be picking you up on Tuesdays and Thursdays from now on. Really? Awesome. She slipped her small hand into mine as we walked toward the car. Can we draw when we get home? I want to try the new pencils. Absolutely. I was thinking we could start with some basic shapes and shading techniques. Sophie chattered happily all the way home, filling me in on school dynamics and her current favorite books. Her uncomplicated affection was a balm to my spirit after the strained interactions with James and Vanessa. At home, we set up an impromptu art studio at the dining table. I showed Sophie how to hold the pencils for different effects, how to create depth with simple shading, how to observe and translate what she saw onto paper. You're really good at this, she said, watching me sketch a quick still life of the fruit bowl. Why didn't you ever tell me you could draw? I used to do a lot more of it before your dad was born, I explained. Life gets busy sometimes, and we set things aside. You shouldn't set aside things you love, Sophie declared with the simple wisdom of childhood. That's what Ms. Bryant tells us at school. She says we should always make time for what makes our hearts happy. Out. Of the mouths of babes, I had spent decades setting aside my own interests, my own happiness, to focus on James, on his needs and ambitions. And where had it gotten me? Kicked out on Christmas night, treated as an inconvenience rather than a beloved mother. Your Ms. Bryant is very wise, I told Sophie. Maybe it's time I started listening to that advice. We were still drawing when Vanessa arrived home, earlier than usual. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Colored pencils scattered across the table, sheets of paper covered in Sophie's enthusiastic attempts and my more practiced sketches. What's all this? She asked, her tone carefully neutral. Grandma Ellie is teaching me to draw, Sophie exclaimed. Look what I made. She held up a surprisingly good attempt at a portrait of our elderly neighbor's cat. That's lovely, Sophie, Vanessa said, setting down her briefcase. But it's time to clean up now. You have piano practice in 30 minutes. Sophie's face fell. Can't I skip it just this once? We're having fun. Music lessons aren't optional, Vanessa replied firmly. You know the rules. Go wash up while I start dinner. Sophie sighed dramatically but began gathering her art supplies. Can we draw more tomorrow, Grandma Ellie? Of course, sweetheart. We'll save some time after your homework. As Sophie headed upstairs, Vanessa turned to me, her expression tightening. I appreciate you spending time with her, but please don't undermine our schedule. Piano lessons are important for her development. I wasn't trying to undermine anything, I replied calmly. We were simply enjoying an activity. Together. Well, in the future, please check with James or me before starting these projects. Sophie has a full schedule of enrichment activities, and we don't want her falling behind. I bit back a sharper response, reminding myself that antagonizing Vanessa wouldn't serve any purpose. I'll keep that in mind. But as I helped clean up the art supplies, I couldn't help reflecting on the contrast between Sophie's joyful immersion in drawing and Vanessa's rigid insistence on scheduled enrichment. It reminded me of how James had changed as he grew older, from a curious, creative child to a structured, achievement-oriented adult who measured success in titles and acquisitions rather than happiness. Had I contributed to that transformation with my own emphasis on security and stability? Had my focus on providing for his future come at the expense of teaching him to value the present moment, to find joy in creativity rather than just productivity? These thoughts were still swirling in my mind that evening when my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously, only to be surprised by a familiar voice. Ellie Mitchell? This is Howard Greenfield's daughter, Jennifer. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Jennifer, of course. No, it's fine. How are you? I hadn't spoken to Jennifer since Howard's funeral 2 years ago, though we had exchanged Christmas cards. I'm well, thank you. I'm calling because I've been going through Dad's papers, and I found something I think he would have wanted you to have. It's a letter he wrote to you, apparently not long before he passed. It was in his personal files, never mailed. A letter? I echoed, surprised. Yes. And there's something else. A deed to a small property on Lakeside Drive. Dad apparently purchased it as an investment about 10 years ago. The letter indicates he intended to transfer ownership to you, but his health declined before he could complete the paperwork. My heart raced. Jennifer, I couldn't possibly accept. Please, Ellie, she interrupted gently. Dad thought the world of you. He always said you were the most dedicated nurse he'd ever worked with, and that you deserved far more recognition than you received. This was clearly important to him. I don't know what to say. Say you'll meet me for coffee tomorrow. so I can give you the letter and discuss the property. Dad would have wanted his wishes honored. We arranged to meet at the Copper Kettle at 11 the next morning. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this unexpected development. Howard had been more than a boss. He had been a mentor, a friend, almost a father figure during my decades at Northside General. But a property? That seemed beyond the bounds of even our close professional relationship. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe early, choosing a quiet corner table away from the windows. I didn't want to risk running into Patricia or any of her friends while having this particular conversation. Jennifer arrived precisely at 11, looking so much like her father that it gave me a momentary pang. She carried a manila envelope and a warm smile. "Ellie, it's good to see you," she said, embracing me briefly before sitting down. "You look well." "As do you," I replied, though in truth she looked tired, the strain of settling her father's affairs evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. After ordering coffee, Jennifer placed the envelope on the table between us. "I should explain a bit more about the property. It's a small cottage on Lakeside Drive, part of the artist colony that developed there in the 1970s. Dad bought it when the previous owner, an old friend of his, a painter, passed away. He kept it mostly as it was, occasionally lending it to visiting doctors or researchers who needed temporary housing." I listened, bewildered by this revelation. Howard had never mentioned owning such a property. "The letter will explain more," Jennifer continued, sliding the envelope toward me. "But essentially, Dad stipulated in his will that the cottage should go to you. The lawyers have been trying to locate you for months. Apparently, you moved from your previous address?" "Yes," I said. "I sold my condo to help my son with a down payment on his house. I've been living with him until recently." I didn't elaborate on the current situation. Jennifer didn't need to be burdened with the details of my family drama. "Well, that explains why they couldn't find you. In any case, all the paperwork is in order. The property taxes are paid through next year from Dad's estate. All that's needed is your signature to transfer the deed." She pushed the envelope closer. "Please read the letter. I think it will help you understand." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and extracted a single sheet of paper covered in Howard's distinctive, precise handwriting. "Dear Ellie, if you're reading this, I'm no longer around to explain in person, so I'll have to trust these words to convey what I want you to know. Throughout my 40 years in medicine, I've worked with thousands of healthcare professionals. None have exemplified the combination of clinical excellence and genuine compassion that you brought to Northside General every single day. You were the kind of nurse who reminded me why I went into medicine in the first place: to help people, to ease suffering, to make a difference in individual lives. What always troubled me, however, was watching how your professional dedication came at such personal cost. How many times did you miss your own son's events to cover a shift? How often did you set aside your own dreams, your art, your travel plans, to ensure James had every opportunity? All while raising him alone, without the support you deserved. The cottage on Lakeside Drive was my refuge for many years, a place where I could escape the intensity of hospital work and reconnect with the natural world. I've seen how you admire the paintings in my office, particularly those depicting the lake at sunrise. I've heard you speak wistfully of returning to your own artistic pursuits someday. Ellie, someday is now. You've given decades of service to others. It's time you had a space that's solely yours, where you can explore the creative talents you've kept dormant for too long. The cottage isn't grand, just 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a sunroom that faces east over the lake. But it has excellent light for painting, a small garden that blooms spectacularly in spring, and a community of kind, creative neighbors who value authenticity over pretense. Please accept this gift in the spirit it's offered, not as charity, but as recognition of your exceptional worth, both as a healthcare professional and as a human being of rare integrity. Your friend, Howard tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. Howard had seen me, truly seen me, in a way few others ever had. He had recognized not just my professional contribution, but the personal sacrifices that had accompanied it. And somehow, he had anticipated that I would one day need exactly the kind of sanctuary he was offering. "He never sent this," I said, softly, looking up at Jennifer. She shook her head. "Dad was a proud man. I think he worried you might refuse the gift if he offered it while he was alive. It was easier for him to make it a bequest." "It's too much," I protested weakly. "The property must be worth—" "Dad didn't care about the monetary value," Jennifer interrupted gently. "He cared about you having a place that would nurture the parts of yourself you've neglected. He talked about you often, about how you put everyone else first, how you deserved more recognition than you received." I carefully refolded the letter, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to name. Gratitude, certainly. Grief for the friend I had lost, but also a strange sense of being truly seen and valued for who I was, not just for what I could provide to others. "When can I see it?" I asked finally. Jennifer smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Today, if you'd like. I have the keys with me." An hour later, we turned onto Lakeside Drive, a narrow road that wound along the shore of the small lake that gave Riverside Heights its name. The neighborhood was exactly as Howard had described, a collection of modest cottages and small homes nestled among mature oak and maple trees, many with artist studios visible through large windows. Jennifer pulled up in front of a pale blue cottage set slightly back from the road. A flagstone path led through a dormant but clearly once vibrant garden to a covered porch with a swing. Even in winter, I could see why Howard had been drawn to the place. It exuded a peaceful, creative energy. "This is it," Jennifer said, handing me a set of keys. "Would you like to go in alone first? I'm happy to wait in the car." I nodded, grateful for her sensitivity. "Thank you. Just for a few minutes." The front door opened directly into a cozy living room with a Riverstone fireplace. To the right, a small but functional kitchen with a breakfast nook overlooking the garden. To the left, a short hallway leading to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. But it was the sunroom at the back of the cottage that took my breath away. Just as Howard had described, it faced east over the lake, with floor-to-ceiling windows capturing the winter light. An easel stood in one corner, dusty but sturdy. Shelves along one wall held art supplies, paints, brushes, canvases, all waiting for someone to bring them to life. I moved slowly through the space, running my fingers over surfaces, opening cabinets, absorbing the sense of potential that filled every corner. This wasn't just a house, it was a canvas for a new chapter of life. When I returned to the car, Jennifer was on the phone but quickly ended her call. "What do you think?" she asked, her expression hopeful. "It's perfect," I said simply. "Absolutely perfect." "The deed transfer papers are here," she said, pulling another envelope from her bag. "You can take them to your attorney to review if you'd like, but they're straightforward. Once you sign, the cottage is yours." I held the envelope, still, hardly able to believe what was happening. "Jennifer, I don't know how to thank you, and Howard. No thanks necessary. Dad would be thrilled to know the cottage will be used and loved." She hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing. Dad set aside a small fund for maintenance and renovations. About $25,000. That's included in the transfer. It was almost too much to process. Not only a home of my own, but the means to make it truly mine." After days of feeling displaced and unwanted, the universe seemed to be offering a counterbalance of unexpected generosity. On the drive back to Cedar Lane, my mind raced with possibilities. The cottage would need some updating, fresh paint, perhaps new appliances. The garden would need attention come spring. And the sunroom. I could already envision myself there, canvas before me, capturing the lake's changing moods. But more importantly, I needed to determine how this unexpected gift affected my negotiations with James. With the cottage now available, did I still need the full 90 days at Cedar Lane? Did I still want the $230,000 buyout, or could I afford to be more flexible now that housing was secured? Diana would help me navigate these questions. But one thing was already clear. Howard's posthumous gift had fundamentally altered the balance of power. I was no longer a displaced mother seeking refuge. I was a property owner with options. When I returned to Cedar Lane, the house was empty. James and Vanessa still at work, Sophie at her after-school program. I moved through the rooms with a new perspective, seeing it not as the home I had lost, but as a temporary way station on the journey to somewhere better. I called Diana immediately, explaining the unexpected development. "That's extraordinary," she said when I had finished. "Have you seen the property yet?" "Yes, just now." "It's perfect, Diana. Exactly what I would have chosen for myself." "And legally, it's a clean transfer? No conditions or complications?" "Jennifer says it's straightforward. Howard explicitly left it to me in his will." "I'd still like to review the paperwork if you don't mind, just to ensure everything's in order." "Of course. I can bring it to your office tomorrow." "Perfect. Now how does this change things with James and the buyout?" I considered the question carefully. "I still want the buyout. The cottage needs some updating and I'll need funds to live on. But I'm thinking I might not need the full 90 days here, if I could accelerate the process." "Let me see what I can do," Diana said. "With the cottage providing immediate housing, we might have additional leverage to expedite the payment." After hanging up, I felt a surge of energy I hadn't experienced in years. I needed to tell Ruth, to show her the cottage, to begin planning in earnest. But first, I needed to process what had happened, how dramatically my circumstances had changed in just 24 hours. From homeless on Christmas night to homeowner again, with financial security on the horizon. From dependent to independent, from displaced to centered. I went to the guest room and took out my long-neglected sketchbook, opening to a fresh page. My hand moved almost of its own accord, rough lines gradually resolving into the cottage as seen from the lakeside, the morning light just breaking over the water. It wasn't a masterpiece. Decades of disuse had dulled my skills, but it captured something essential about the moment. A new dawn, literally and figuratively. A fresh beginning in a place that already felt more like home than Cedar Lane ever had. When Sophie burst through the front door at 5:30, vibrating with the energy only 8-year-olds possess, I was waiting with a smile and a surprise of my own. "Guess what, Sophie? I found a cottage by the lake, and it's going to be my new home. And it has a sunroom perfect for painting, big enough for 2 artists to work side by side." Her eyes widened with delight. "Can I come visit? Can I paint?" "With you there?" "Anytime," I promised. "We'll set up a special corner just for you." Sophie threw her arms around me, her acceptance uncomplicated by adult concerns about money or propriety or family dynamics. In her world, Grandma Ellie having a cottage by the lake where they could paint together was simply wonderful news. James and Vanessa arrived home moments later, finding us huddled over the sketchbook where I had drawn a quick outline of the cottage's floor plan. "What's all this?" James asked, loosening his tie as he surveyed the scene. "Grandma Ellie found a cottage," Sophie announced before I could speak. "By the lake, and I can visit and paint with her." James looked at me questioningly. "A cottage? When did this happen?" "Today," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "It was left to me by Howard Greenfield in his will. His daughter Jennifer contacted me yesterday." "Dr. Greenfield left you a house?" Vanessa's disbelief was palpable. "Why would he do that?" "We were colleagues and friends for 40 years, I replied simply. "He knew I enjoyed the lakeside area and thought I would appreciate the property." "So you'll be moving out?" James asked, his expression unreadable. Yes, as soon as the deed transfer is complete, which means we may be able to accelerate our other arrangements as well. Understanding dawned in his eyes. I was referring to the buyout payment. I'll need to talk to Gerald about that, he said cautiously. The financing isn't finalized yet. Of course, Diana and I will be flexible within reason. An awkward silence fell, broken by Sophie tugging at my hand. Can we go see the cottage now, Grandma Ellie? Please? Not today, sweetheart. It's almost dinner time, but soon, I promise. News of the lakeside cottage spread through James and Vanessa's social circle with remarkable speed. By the following evening, I was receiving curious texts from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months, each message thinly disguising their interest in the gossip with expressions of concern for my well-being. Heard you're moving to Lakeside. Such a lovely area. Do let me know if you need help packing. Eleanor, is it true about Dr. Greenfield leaving you property? How extraordinary! I responded politely but briefly to each message, neither confirming nor denying the details. The less information circulating about my financial situation, the better. Patricia, predictably, was less subtle. She arrived unannounced at Cedar Lane the next afternoon, ostensibly to drop off a casserole dish Vanessa had left at their last family dinner. Eleanor, she said with feigned surprise when I answered the door. I didn't expect to find you home at this hour. Where else would I be? I asked mildly, stepping aside to let her in. Patricia bustled into the kitchen, setting down the dish with more force than necessary. Well, I assumed you'd be at your new lakeside property. Vanessa mentioned you've come into quite the windfall. Of course, Vanessa had told her mother everything. The two were practically symbiotic in their exchange of information and opinions. Hardly a windfall, I corrected her. Howard was a dear friend and colleague who wanted to ensure I had a comfortable place to live in retirement. Patricia's lips pursed slightly. Still, it's extremely unusual. People don't typically give away valuable real estate to employees. The implication was clear and ugly. Patricia was suggesting there had been something improper about my relationship with Howard. Dr. Greenfield was my supervisor and mentor for 40 years, I said, my voice cooling several degrees. He was also happily married to his wife, Marianne, for 62 years until her passing. Any insinuation to the contrary is not only incorrect, but deeply disrespectful to both their memories. Patricia had the grace to look momentarily abashed, but quickly rallied. I wasn't suggesting anything untoward, Eleanor. I simply find it curious that he would leave such a valuable gift to someone outside his family. Howard's children are well provided for, I replied. They support his decision completely. Well, it's certainly convenient timing for you, Patricia pressed on. Almost as if you knew this property was coming your way when you demanded that outrageous buyout amount from James and Vanessa. So that was what this visit was really about. James and Vanessa had sent Patricia to fish for information and possibly to pressure me into reducing my financial demands. The cottage has no bearing on the legal agreement regarding this house, I said firmly. The buyout amount reflects my substantial investment in this property and its current market value. Nothing more. Patricia's expression hardened. James and Vanessa are struggling to secure that kind of financing on short notice. I don't see why you can't be more flexible now that you have another place to live. I've already shown flexibility by agreeing to expedite my move out, I pointed out. The financial settlement is non-negotiable. That's rather cold, Eleanor. They are family, after all. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Family, I repeated slowly. The same family that kicked me out on Christmas Day? That family? Patricia had the decency to flush slightly. That was unfortunate timing, but surely you understand their need for space with the new baby coming. What I understand, I said, moving toward the front door in a clear signal that the conversation was ending, is that actions have consequences. James and Vanessa made their choice. Now they need to honor the legal agreement their attorney negotiated. This isn't over, Patricia warned as she stepped outside. James won't be bullied into financial hardship by his own mother. I closed the door without responding, leaning against it briefly as I composed myself. Patricia's visit had left me unsettled, not because of her accusations, those were predictable, but because they hinted at an escalation I hadn't anticipated. If James and Vanessa were truly struggling to secure the buyout funds, what might they try next? I called Diana immediately, explaining Patricia's visit and my concerns. It's a classic negotiating tactic, Diana assured me. Claim financial hardship to pressure you into accepting less. But the fact is, property records show James and Vanessa have substantial equity in the house, more than enough to secure financing for the buyout. So they're bluffing? Most likely, or at least exaggerating their difficulties. Either way, stand firm. We have a signed agreement that's legally binding. I felt better after speaking with Diana, but still concerned enough to call Ruth as well. She had always been better than me at anticipating people's less honorable motivations. They're planning something, Ruth said immediately when I described Patricia's visit. That woman doesn't do anything without an agenda. Diana thinks they're just trying to pressure me into reducing the buyout amount. Maybe, Ruth conceded. Or maybe they're looking for leverage of some kind. Have you started moving your things to the cottage yet? Not yet. The deed transfer will be finalized on Monday, and then I'll start bringing over small items. The cottage is partially furnished already, so there's not that much to move. Well, make sure you secure any valuables or important documents until then. I wouldn't put it past Vanessa to go through your things looking for ammunition. The warning sent a chill through me. Would they really resort to such tactics? But then I remembered the Christmas night eviction, the cold calculation with which they had removed me from their lives until I proved to have legal leverage. Yes, they might indeed search for ways to undermine my position. That evening, I methodically went through the guest room, gathering anything of personal or financial significance. My mother's jewelry, already secured in my purse since the confrontation with Patricia at the piano shop. The original deed to the Cedar Lane house, safely stored in Diana's office. My financial records and identification documents, which I packed into a small fireproof box. As I worked, I became aware of subtle sounds from the hallway, floorboards creaking, the almost imperceptible sound of breathing. Someone was lingering outside my door, likely listening to my movements. Without changing my rhythm or giving any indication I'd noticed, I continued organizing my belongings, but I was careful not to speak aloud or make any sounds that might reveal what I was doing. When I had gathered everything of importance, I placed the fireproof box in the bottom of my largest suitcase, covering it with clothes and linens. Only then did I open the door abruptly, almost colliding with Vanessa, who had clearly been standing just outside. "Oh!" She stepped back quickly, her surprise seeming too exaggerated to be genuine. "Eleanor, you startled me. I was just coming to ask if you wanted some coffee." It was nearly 9 o'clock at night, well past the time either of us typically drank coffee. "No, thank you," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm just doing some organizing before the move." Vanessa's eyes darted past me to the half-packed suitcase on the bed. "So, you'll be leaving soon? James mentioned the cottage transfer is happening Monday." "That's right. I'll probably move most of my things next week once the deed is finalized." "And the buyout?" She couldn't quite keep the tension from her voice. "That will proceed as scheduled, according to the agreement Gerald and Diana drafted." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Of course. Well, good night then." As she walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Vanessa had always been difficult to read, polite on the surface but with currents of resentment running beneath. Tonight, though, there had been something else in her manner. A calculation, perhaps, or a barely suppressed agitation. I called Ruth again, this time keeping my voice low and stepping into the attached bathroom with the water running to ensure privacy. Vanessa was listening outside my door, I explained, and she seemed oddly interested in when I'd be moving my things to the cottage. Don't leave anything valuable there unattended until you've changed the locks, Ruth advised immediately. In fact, I think you should stay with me again until the deed transfer is complete, just to be safe. You think they'd try to block me from taking possession? I think desperate people do desperate things, especially when money and pride are involved. Ruth's warning seemed excessive in the moment, but I respected her instincts enough to pack an overnight bag just in case. I texted Diana as well, asking if there was any way to expedite the final paperwork on the cottage. Already on it, she replied. I've arranged for a notary to meet us at my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Jennifer Greenfield will be there with the executor of Howard's estate. We should be able to complete the transfer then, rather than waiting for Monday. I slept fitfully that night, waking several times to unfamiliar sounds in the house. Each time I reminded myself that I was still legally the primary owner of the Cedar Lane property, that Diana had the situation well in hand, that in just a few days I would be free of this uncomfortable living arrangement. When morning came, I dressed quickly and quietly, slipping out of the house before James or Vanessa stirred. I left a note saying I had errands to run and would be back in the afternoon, deliberately vague about my actual destination. At Diana's office, Jennifer was already waiting, accompanied by an elderly gentleman she introduced as Howard's longtime attorney and the executor of his estate. The meeting proceeded smoothly, with documents signed, notarized, and filed electronically with the county recorder's office. "Congratulations, Ellie," Diana said warmly, handing me a folder containing copies of all the paperwork. "You are now the legal owner of 437 Lakeside Drive." "And here are the keys," Jennifer added, passing me a ring with several keys attached. "The locksmith just finished rekeying everything yesterday, so these are brand new. No previous owners or caretakers will have access." The precaution struck me as extraordinarily thoughtful, especially in light of Ruth's warnings. "Thank you, Jennifer. That's very kind." "It's standard procedure with property transfers," she assured me. "But I'm glad it gives you peace of mind." After the meeting, I drove directly to the cottage, eager to see it again now that it was officially mine. The lakeside neighborhood was quiet on this Saturday morning, with only a few residents visible, walking dogs or tending to winter gardens. I parked in the small gravel driveway and approached the front door, key in hand. The simple act of unlocking the door to my own home, a home that came with no strings attached, no complicated family dynamics, no history of betrayal, felt momentous. Inside, the cottage welcomed me with the same sense of peaceful potential I'd felt on my first visit. Dust motes danced in the morning light streaming through the sunroom windows. The vintage kitchen, with its pale blue cabinets and white tile countertops, felt both nostalgic and timeless. The bedrooms, though modestly sized, offered more than enough space for my needs. I moved through each room slowly, mentally planning where my belongings would go, what updates might be needed, how the space would evolve to reflect my preferences and lifestyle. For the first time since Christmas night, I felt genuinely excited about the future. My phone buzzed with a text from Ruth. "Everything go okay with the deed transfer?" "Perfect," I replied. "I'm at the cottage now. It's officially mine." "Wonderful. I'll be by this afternoon to help you celebrate and to check the locks." I smiled at Ruth's protective instincts, but had to admit I found them reassuring. After decades of putting others first, it felt unfamiliar but deeply gratifying to have someone so firmly in my corner. As I was about to leave to pick up a few cleaning supplies, my phone rang. The caller ID showed James's number. "Hello, James," I answered, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Mom, where are you?" His voice sounded strained. "Vanessa said you left a note about running errands." "That's right. I had some paperwork to take care of." At Diana Mendez's office, finalizing the cottage transfer? So they had been monitoring my movements. Yes, as a matter of fact, the deed is now officially in my name. There was a moment of silence on the line. I wish you had told us. We need to talk about the buyout situation. What about it? The terms are already established in the agreement. You signed. There's been a complication. Gerald says there might be an issue with the original deed to the Cedar Lane house. My heart rate quickened. What kind of issue? Something about how it was executed. He thinks there might be grounds to challenge your primary ownership claim. This was exactly the kind of escalation Diana had warned might come if they felt cornered. James, we both know the deed is valid. Howard made sure of that. This sounds like a delay tactic. It's not a tactic, Mom. It's a legitimate legal question. Gerald wants to meet again on Monday to discuss it. Then he can contact Diana directly. All legal matters go through her, as we agreed. Why are you being so rigid about this? James demanded, frustration evident in his voice. We're trying to find a solution that works for everyone. No, you're trying to find a way to avoid paying what you legally owe me, I countered. The agreement was clear, James. $230,000 for my interest in the house. If you're having trouble securing financing, that's not my problem. Not your problem? His voice rose. I'm your son. My family's financial stability should matter to you. It mattered to me for 34 years, I replied, my own voice steady but firm. It mattered when I worked double shifts to pay for your braces. It mattered when I drained my savings to help with your college tuition. It mattered when I sold my condo to give you the down payment for a house you later kicked me out of. But somehow my financial stability never seemed to matter to you. James was silent for a moment. That's not fair, he finally said, his tone defensive. We've always been grateful for your help. Grateful people don't evict their mothers on Christmas Day. Another silence, longer this time. Look, can we just talk in person, without lawyers? Maybe we can work something out directly. The request seemed reasonable on its face, but alarm bells rang in my mind. Why the sudden push for an informal discussion after they had already engaged legal representation? Why the mysterious issue with the deed that Gerald had supposedly discovered? I don't think that's a good idea, I said carefully. We've already established a legal framework for resolving this situation. Let's stick to that process. Fine, James snapped, his conciliatory tone evaporating. Have it your way, but don't say I didn't try to handle this amicably. The call ended abruptly, leaving me unsettled. I immediately called Diana to relay the conversation. It's as I suspected, she said after hearing my account. They're fishing for ways to undermine the original deed. Rest assured, Ellie, the document is ironclad. Howard knew exactly what he was doing when he had it drafted. Should I be worried about this meeting Gerald wants? Not at all. In fact, I'll contact him today to get ahead of whatever they're planning. In the meantime, how are you settling into the cottage? I'm just starting to plan the move. I thought I'd begin bringing over some personal items tomorrow. Good. Idea. The sooner you establish residency there, the better. And Ellie, consider accelerating your complete move out from Cedar Lane. Given James's tone, I think it's wise to limit your time there as much as possible. After hanging up, I continued my exploration of the cottage with a new sense of urgency. Diana's advice to accelerate my move made practical sense, but it would require careful planning. The cottage needed cleaning and some basic updates before it would be truly livable. I made a quick trip to the nearest home improvement store, purchasing cleaning supplies, light bulbs, and a few basic tools. Back at the cottage, I spent the next several hours scrubbing surfaces, washing windows, and assessing what further work would be needed. Ruth arrived as promised in the early afternoon, bearing a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. Housewarming. Gift, she announced, setting them on the kitchen counter. And I brought sandwiches too, since I figured you'd forget to eat. She was right. I'd been so absorbed in cleaning that hunger hadn't registered. We sat at the small kitchen table, eating and discussing the property's potential. The bones are good, Ruth declared, echoing my own assessment. Fresh paint, some updated fixtures, maybe new appliances eventually. But you could move in tomorrow, if you needed to. That might be necessary sooner than I thought, I admitted, filling her in on James's call and Diana's advice. Ruth's expression grew serious. I knew they were planning something. James has always been stubborn when his pride is hurt, and Vanessa comes from a family that doesn't take no for an answer. But what could they possibly do? The deeds to both properties are clear and legally binding. They might not be able to win in court, but they can certainly make the process difficult and unpleasant. Legal challenges, even frivolous ones, take time and energy to resolve. I hadn't considered that angle. James and Vanessa might well know their position was legally weak, but could still use the threat of prolonged litigation as leverage. So, what do? I asked. Exactly what Diana suggested. Accelerate your move, limit your time at Cedar Lane, and let the attorneys handle all communication. And, Ruth added, her expression softening, start enjoying this beautiful cottage. Don't let their tactics rob you of this moment. She was right, of course. I had spent too many years allowing others' needs and demands to overshadow my own joy. This cottage was a gift in more ways than one, not just shelter, but an opportunity to reclaim my identity beyond motherhood and caregiving. We opened the champagne, toasting my new beginning. As the afternoon light slanted through the sunroom windows, casting long golden rectangles across the wooden floor, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. I think I'll sleep here tonight, I decided suddenly. There's a bed in the main bedroom, and I brought enough personal items in my overnight bag to manage. Perfect, Ruth approved. I'll help you get settled, then come back tomorrow with breakfast and boxes for packing the rest of your things from Cedar Lane. With Ruth's assistance, I made up the bed with fresh linens from the linen closet, set up the bathroom with basic toiletries, and confirmed that all utilities were functioning properly. By evening, the cottage felt surprisingly homey despite its sparse furnishings. After Ruth left, promising to return in the morning, I sat in the sunroom watching darkness fall over the lake. Lights from other cottages reflected on the water, creating a constellation of earthbound stars. The silence was profound but comforting. No muffled conversations from other rooms, no tension-filled atmosphere, just the occasional lap of water against the shore and the distant call of a night bird. I texted James to let him know I wouldn't be returning to Cedar Lane that night, deliberately vague about when I would be back. His response was immediate and terse. We need to talk before you move anything else out of the house. The demand confirmed my suspicion that they were planning some kind of intervention. I showed the text to Diana, who advised me to respond simply, any discussions about property division should go through our respective attorneys. I sent the message as suggested, then turned off notifications from James's number. Whatever. They were planning could wait until Monday when Diana would be available to manage the situation. Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp, with sunlight sparkling on the lake's surface. I woke early, drawn to the sunroom by the golden light. Sitting, cross-legged on the floor with a cup of tea, I watched a pair of ducks glide across the water, leaving V-shaped ripples in their wake. Ruth arrived at 9, as promised, with breakfast and packing supplies. Any more communications from the Cedar Lane contingent? She asked as she unpacked bagels and cream cheese. Nothing since that text last night. I turned off notifications from James's number. Smart. Now, let's make a plan for retrieving your belongings. I think we should go together, around midday when Sophie will be at her weekend science program. The strategy made sense. minimize the chance of confrontation by choosing a time when the household would be least crowded. We spent the morning preparing the cottage for my permanent move, clearing space in closets and drawers, making lists of immediate necessities versus items that could wait. At noon, we drove to Cedar Lane in Ruth's car. I still had my key, but something made me hesitate before using it. Instead, I rang the doorbell, somehow sensing that crossing the threshold unannounced would escalate tensions. Vanessa answered, her expression tightening when she saw Ruth behind me. "Eleanor, we weren't expecting you back so soon." "I've come to collect more of my belongings," I explained, maintaining a calm, professional tone. "Ruth is helping me pack." "James wanted to speak with you before you removed anything else from the house," Vanessa said, not moving from the doorway. "He's very concerned about the division of property." "The only property I'm taking is what's undisputedly mine. Clothing. Personal items. A few small furnishings I brought with me when I moved in. Still, it would be better to wait until James is home." Her stance in the doorway remained firm, a clear signal she didn't intend to let us enter. Ruth stepped forward, slightly. "Vanessa, I understand this is a difficult situation, but Ellie is still legally the primary owner of this house. Refusing her entry could be construed as an illegal lockout, which would significantly complicate the legal proceedings already in motion." The subtle reminder of my legal position had its intended effect. Vanessa's expression flickered with uncertainty, then resignation as she stepped aside. "Fine, but please stick to your personal items only." "Of course," I agreed, though the suggestion that I might take anything else was both offensive and absurd. I had never been anything but generous with James and Vanessa, including leaving behind most of the furniture I'd owned when I sold my condo. In the guest room, Ruth and I worked efficiently, packing clothes, books, the few decorative items that were unquestionably mine. The fireproof box containing my important documents was exactly where I'd left it, tucked securely in the bottom of my largest suitcase. "Let's check the attic," I suggested quietly to Ruth. "There are some family heirlooms stored there, photo albums, my father's military medals, my wedding china." We found the attic access in the hallway ceiling, pulled down the folding stairs, and climbed up. The space was dusty but well organized, with labeled boxes stacked neatly along the walls. I located my family items quickly, having arranged them myself when I first moved in. As Ruth and I carried the boxes downstairs, James's car pulled into the driveway. He entered the house just as we were loading the last box into Ruth's trunk. "Mom," he called, striding toward us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Part anger, part something else. Desperation, perhaps? "What are you doing?" "Collecting my belongings, as I texted you I would. I told you we needed to talk first. There are issues that need to be resolved." "Any issues can be addressed through our attorneys tomorrow," I replied calmly. "I'm only taking what's indisputably mine." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I remembered from his childhood. "This isn't about your clothes or books. It's about the house, about the deed." "What about it?" I kept my voice level, though my pulse had quickened. "Gerald found something in the original paperwork, a discrepancy in how the trust was structured. He thinks there's a case to be made that I should have had equal ownership from the beginning, not just contingent beneficiary status." The claim was so outlandish that I almost laughed. "James, that's simply not true. Howard and Diana were meticulous about the documentation. The deed is clear and legally binding." "It's not that simple," he insisted. "There are technical issues with how the agreement was executed. Gerald says we have grounds for a challenge that could tie things up in court for years." And there it was. The threat Ruth had predicted. Not a genuine legal claim, but a bludgeon to force concessions. "If that's the approach you want to take, you're welcome to try," I said steadily. "But be aware that such challenges are expensive, time-consuming, and in this case, ultimately futile." The deed will stand up to any scrutiny. Why are you being so hard-headed about this? James demanded, his voice rising. We're talking about my family's home, Mom. Sophie's home. A home purchased with my life savings, I reminded him. A home from which you evicted me on Christmas Day. That wasn't an eviction. We just needed space. You threw me out with no notice and no concern for where I would go. You paid for a week at a hotel and expected me to somehow secure housing on a fixed income with most of my savings already invested in this house. What would you call that, if not an eviction? James fell silent, his expression conflicted. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed a flicker of shame, quickly suppressed. We could have handled it better, he conceded reluctantly. But that doesn't justify you trying to extort hundreds of thousands of dollars from us now. It's not extortion. James, it's a fair return on my investment in this property, an investment that has appreciated considerably over 5 years. We can't afford it, he said flatly, not without taking on crushing debt or selling the house entirely. That's not my understanding, I countered. Diana consulted with several mortgage brokers who confirmed that with your income and the house's current value, the buyout is entirely manageable. James's face flushed. So you've been investigating our finances? That's invasive. No more invasive than your attempt to challenge a legally binding deed. Or were you hoping I'd simply walk away from my investment out of maternal guilt? The direct question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked away, neither confirming nor denying my assessment. Ruth, who had been quietly observing our exchange, spoke up. James, I've known you since you were a teenager. You've always been smart and practical. Surely you can see that dragging this out in court won't benefit anyone. Not you, not Vanessa, certainly not Sophie. Wouldn't it be better to honor the agreement you've already signed and move forward? Her calm, reasonable tone seemed to reach him in a way my words couldn't. His shoulders sagged slightly. I just need more time to arrange the financing, he said, his voice lower now. 90 days isn't enough. I exchanged a glance with Ruth, considering. Perhaps this was the real issue. Not an unwillingness to pay, but difficulty securing the funds on the agreed timeline. I could discuss an extension with Diana, I offered cautiously. Perhaps 6 months instead of 90 days, with interest accruing after the initial period. But the amount remains non-negotiable. James hesitated, clearly torn between pride and pragmatism. I'd need to discuss it with Vanessa and Gerald, he said finally. But that might work. It wasn't capitulation exactly, but it was a step back from the brink of legal warfare. I nodded, relieved that escalation might be avoided. Have Gerald contact Diana tomorrow, I said. They can work out the details. As Ruth and I prepared to leave, Sophie returned from her science program, bubbling with excitement about the experiments they had conducted. When she saw the packed car, her face fell. Are you leaving for good, Grandma Ellie? She asked, her voice small. I knelt to her level, taking her hands in mine. I'm moving to the cottage by the lake, remember? But you can visit anytime. In fact, I've already set up a special art corner just for you in the sunroom. Promise? I promise, sweetheart. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, strawberry shampoo and the indefinable essence of childhood. Nothing will ever change how much I love you. Over her head, I met James's gaze, a silent communication passing between us. Whatever our conflicts, whatever legal and financial battles we might wage, Sophie's well-being had to remain paramount. On that, at least, we still agreed. As Ruth and I drove away from Cedar Lane for what might be the last time, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what had been lost, relief that open conflict might be avoided, anticipation for the new life awaiting me at Lakeside Drive. You handled that well, Ruth observed as we turned onto the main road. Firm but reasonable. I hope so, I sighed. The last thing I want is a protracted legal battle with my own son. I don't think it will come to that. James may be stubborn, but he's not stupid. Fighting a losing battle in court would cost him more in the long run, both financially and in terms of his relationship with Sophie. What relationship with Sophie? I asked, confused by her meaning. Ruth glanced at me. Sophie is getting older. Eventually, she'll ask questions about what happened between you and her parents. She'll form her own opinions about who was right and who was wrong. James knows that dragging this into an ugly court fight might cost him his daughter's respect when she's old enough to understand. It was a perspective I hadn't considered, the long-term implications for how Sophie would view her parents' actions. Would she one day judge them for how they had treated me? Would she question the values they had demonstrated during this conflict? I don't want Sophie to think less of her father, I said quietly. Despite everything, he's still her dad. Then make sure she knows you tried to resolve things fairly and amicably, Ruth advised. Actions speak louder than words, Ellie. Your dignity throughout this mess says more than any criticism you could voice. At the cottage, we unloaded the boxes and suitcases, arranging my belongings in their new home. With each item unpacked, each book placed on a shelf, each piece of clothing hung in a closet, each framed photo positioned on a surface, the cottage became more truly mine. That evening, I sat in the sunroom watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and gold. The drama with James and the Cedar Lane house wasn't over, I knew. Tomorrow would bring more legal discussions, potentially more challenges. But, somehow, sitting in the peaceful quiet of my own home, a home that had come to me through genuine care and recognition of my worth, the conflict seemed less overwhelming. Whatever came next, I would face it from a position of strength and autonomy. No longer dependent on James's goodwill, no longer vulnerable to eviction or manipulation. I could engage with the situation on my own terms. As darkness fell and the lake became a mirror for the emerging stars, I allowed myself to imagine the months and years ahead in this space. Mornings spent painting as sunlight flooded the sunroom. Afternoons in the garden, coaxing flowers and vegetables from the soil. Evenings hosting small gatherings of friends, Ruth, Diana, perhaps some of the neighbors I had yet to meet. And Sophie, visiting for art lessons and cookie baking sessions, forming memories in this new place that would shape her understanding of her grandmother as someone with her own identity, her own passions, her own life beyond the role of caretaker and supporter. It was a vision worth fighting for, worth standing firm to protect. Not just the physical space of the cottage, but the independence and dignity it represented. My phone chimed with a text from Diana. Gerald called. They want to discuss extending the payment timeline. Meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. in my office. Progress? I think so, I replied. James seemed more reasonable when we spoke today. Good. Get some rest, Ellie. Tomorrow we put this situation to bed once and for all. Rest. Such a simple concept, yet one that had eluded me since Christmas night. But tonight, in my own bed, in my own home, I might finally find it. The battle wasn't over, but a path to resolution had appeared. And beyond that path lay a future I was increasingly eager to embrace, one where Eleanor Mitchell finally put herself first. Monday afternoon arrived with unexpected clarity, both in the brilliant blue sky and in my own mind. As I prepared for the meeting at Diana's office, I felt none of the anxiety that had plagued me throughout this ordeal. Instead, a quiet determination had settled over me like a comfortable shawl. I chose my outfit carefully, a tailored navy, blazer over a cream blouse, simple pearl earrings that had been my mother's, low heels that were both professional and comfortable. Not the wardrobe of a displaced, desperate woman, but of someone who knew her value and was prepared to stand her ground. Ruth had offered to drive me, but I declined. This was a journey I needed to make alone, both literally and figuratively. The drive from Lakeside to Diana's downtown office took me past familiar landmarks that now seemed to belong to another life. The park where I'd pushed James on the swings, the high school where I'd attended his graduation, the hospital where I'd spent my career healing others while often neglecting my own well-being. Diana greeted me in the lobby with a warm smile and a firm handshake. "You look well, Ellie. The cottage seems to agree with you." "It does," I confirmed. "I've already unpacked most of my belongings. It feels like home already." "Good. That puts us in an even stronger position for today's discussion." We were the first to arrive in the conference room. Diana used the time to review our strategy, though there wasn't much to discuss. Our position remained clear and legally sound. The only question was whether James and his team would accept the proposed extended timeline without further attempts at manipulation. When James arrived with Gerald, I was struck by how worn he looked. The confident financial advisor who had so coolly dismissed me on Christmas night now appeared haggard, with shadows under his eyes and tension lines bracketing his mouth. Gerald, by contrast, maintained the smooth, unruffled demeanor of a seasoned attorney accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. "Thank you for meeting with us," Gerald began once we were all seated. "We appreciate your willingness to discuss adjustments to the payment timeline." "To be clear," Diana interjected, "the only element open for discussion is the timeline. The amount remains as agreed, $230,000. Gerald nodded, though I noticed a tightening around his eyes. "Understood. Our proposal is for a 1-year payment period rather than 90 days, with the first half due in 6 months and the remainder at the 1-year mark." "That's considerably longer than the extension we discussed," I noted, looking directly at James. "You mentioned 6 months yesterday." James shifted uncomfortably. "After reviewing our finances more carefully, we believe a year is more realistic. We'd be willing to pay interest after the first 6 months, as you suggested." Diana and I exchanged glances. The request wasn't unreasonable, particularly with the interest provision, and extending the timeline would cost me nothing now that I had the cottage. "We can agree to that," Diana said, "with interest at prime plus 1% beginning after 6 months, and with one crucial addition, a promissory note secured by the property to be filed with the county recorder immediately." Gerald frowned. "That seems excessive. James and Vanessa have already signed the settlement agreement." "It's not excessive. It's prudent," Diana countered. "Given the earlier suggestion that they might challenge the original deed, we need additional security for Ellie's interest." I watched James as this exchange unfolded. His expression revealed more than he probably intended: frustration, resignation, and beneath it all, a flicker of shame. Regardless of what legal strategies Gerald had advised, James knew in his heart that he had treated me unfairly. He was simply struggling to find a way forward that preserved his pride and his financial stability. "The promissory note is non-negotiable," I said quietly. "I need to know that this agreement will be honored, James." Something in my tone, perhaps the absence of anger, the simple statement of fact, seemed to reach him. He nodded slowly. "That's fair. We'll sign the note." Relief washed through me. The last potential hurdle had been cleared. Within minutes, Diana and Gerald were drafting the revised agreement, specifying payment dates, interest rates, and the terms of the promissory note. As they worked, James looked at me directly for what felt like the first time since Christmas. "The cottage is nice," he offered awkwardly. "Sophie hasn't stopped talking about the art corner you mentioned." "She's welcome anytime," I said. "And you and Vanessa as well, once things have settled between us." He seemed startled by the invitation. "You'd want us to visit? After everything?" "You're still my son, James, and Sophie is my granddaughter. What happened between us was painful and disappointing, but it doesn't erase 34 years of love." His eyes glistened briefly before he looked away. "I don't know if things can ever go back to how they were." "They can't," I agreed. And perhaps they shouldn't. But we can build something new, something based on mutual respect rather than dependence. It will take time and effort from both of us, but I believe it's possible. We lapsed into silence after that, each absorbed in our own thoughts as the attorneys finalized the paperwork. When everything was ready, we signed in turn. James first, then me, with Diana and Gerald as witnesses. A simple ceremony to formalize the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Outside Diana's office, as we prepared to go our separate ways, James hesitated. "Mom, I'm sorry about Christmas. The timing was cruel, even if we did need the space." It wasn't a complete apology. He still maintained that asking me to leave had been necessary, but it was something. A recognition, at least, that the manner of my departure had been wrong. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "I hope in time you'll understand that my standing firm about the buyout wasn't about punishing you. It was about ensuring I could take care of myself so you'd never again feel burdened by my needs." He nodded, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sophie asked if she could visit the cottage this weekend. Would Saturday afternoon work?" "I'd love that. Tell her to bring her art supplies." We parted without embracing. We weren't there yet, but with a tentative peace established. As I drove back to Lakeside, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Not just the stress of the legal negotiations, but decades of putting James's needs above my own, of measuring my worth by how well I served others, of seeking validation through sacrifice. The cottage welcomed me home with afternoon light gilding its simple rooms. I moved through the space, touching surfaces, adjusting small objects, each action an affirmation of ownership and autonomy. In the sunroom, I set up Sophie's art corner, with supplies I'd purchased specially for her: child-sized easel, non-toxic paints, brushes with comfort grips for small hands. Next, I unpacked my own art supplies, arranging them on a table positioned to capture the best light. The brushes and paints were old, some dried out from disuse, but they represented a commitment I was making to myself, to nurture my creativity, to explore interests set aside during my child-raising years, to discover who Eleanor Mitchell might be beyond mother and nurse. That evening, Ruth and Diana came for dinner. A simple meal of pasta and salad, served on mismatched dishes I'd collected from thrift stores in town. We toasted with inexpensive wine in juice glasses, celebrating not just the legal resolution, but my first dinner party in my new home. "To Ellie," Diana said, raising her glass, "who reminded us all that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." "To cottage life," Ruth added, "and second chances." "To Howard," I said softly, "whose generosity and foresight made this possible." We talked late into the evening, planning updates to the cottage, discussing the Lakeside community's spring festival, exchanging stories and laughter with the easy comfort of true friendship. When they left, promising to return for Sunday brunch the following weekend, I stood on the porch watching their cars disappear down the winding road, filled with gratitude for these women who had stood by me when I needed support most. Inside, I prepared for bed with a new ritual, opening the windows to let in the night air, setting out clothes for morning painting, placing a sketchbook and pencil on the nightstand to capture any ideas that might come in dreams. Small acts of self-care that acknowledged my needs, my preferences, my right to shape my days according to my own rhythms. As I drifted toward sleep, I reflected on the journey that had begun with that terrible Christmas night, the shock of betrayal, the discovery of hidden strength, the strategic moves and countermoves, and finally, resolution and transformation. In losing what I thought was my only option for security, I had found something far more valuable: independence, self-respect, and the freedom to prioritize my own joy. The house on Cedar Lane had never truly been mine, despite the deed that bore my name. It had always belonged to James and Vanessa's vision of family life, with me as a useful accessory until I wasn't. But this cottage, This was mine in every sense. A place where I could welcome others on my terms, where I could pursue interests long deferred, where I could finally become the woman I might have been if life's demands hadn't intervened. The journey wasn't over, I knew. There would be adjustments. As I settled into cottage life, challenges in rebuilding a relationship with James and maintaining my connection with Sophie. The financial security of the buyout wouldn't solve every problem or heal every hurt. But as I closed my eyes, listening to the gentle lap of water against the lake shore, I felt a peace I had not known in years, perhaps ever. The Christmas eviction. That had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning, and for that unexpected gift, I was profoundly grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these. Just click and check them out.